Journey of the Beloved, Chapter 7, Thrice Great. Both Raismes beheld a Dujara, a sparkling jewel rising from the plain. The Thoth and his company had come for a precious jewel. In compliance with the Enochian table, the great ark, which was called by many names, one being the Sacred On, was to be taken from its sequestered chamber in the cave of Mithara and into Atlantis. To be sure, the Sacred On had known many journeys since it had been sent from Orion to the temple of Phala in Tibet, eons before. And of course, it wouldn't have been called Tibet in those ages, but that's where it was. Like a crystal being positioned for a time on certain meridians of the body, the ark was moved about on the planet from point to point and back again. As it was placed on these meridians of the earth, it facilitated Metatronic light codes along its grid. Thoth had been the guardian of the ark. Now, as Thoth Raismes, he was to escort the Sacred On to Atlantis. Ironically, until he had been baptized by Abba, he had not known the ark was within the cave of his initiation. It was then that the sacred table of the Enochian law had opened this revealing chapter to him. With him, Raismes had brought his assembled Raset Ankara. A direct translation of this title is a gathering of the golden falcons of power and glory returning to the earth. All of that in just 2 words. A less cumbersome meaning would be falcon's wellspring. The falcon represented Horus, who archetypally is he who grounds the lightning or brings spirit into energy, penetrating the earth with power and glory. Ra is the solar logos or sun spirit. Set is in Atlantean meant the power to command and was often signified by the falcon. In later ages of Egypt, Set became the evil brother of Horus, the falcon. The Ankh was a symbol of the well of lightning or wellspring of light. Hara was to whirl, spin, or gather. Therefore, it was used as a word to designate a place of worship. He had chosen these personages for his guardian company, an inner assembly dedicated to serving the Thoth in his life mission on the earth. They were also commanded with the guardianship of the Sacred On, since Thoth's duties upon the planet were intricately linked to the guardianship and mysteries of the Sacred On, which we shall call the Ark of Grace. Through the years, the number of this company grew to 26 souls, but at the time Thoth Raismes left the plain of Nimjab and returned to Ajahara, there were 8 persons within the newly formed Raset Ankara. Among them were his sister Lhasa and his brothers Tatatet, or Thoth I'm going to call him, and Stefan. The others were Irutus, the architect under Thoth in the construction of the temple complex Raymond; Bardoka, a former Atlantean horsemaster and friend of Raismes' brother Rasashet; Sha'Maia, a young woman whom Thoth had found working as a seamstress in the city of Corbel. Able to read her Akashic record on sight, he knew her to be one of the children kidnapped by the nomads from Kuri, a city established by the Sunborn in what is now Peru in South America. Kuri, a city of the Sunborn, was located near Lake Titicaca on the Altiplano of Peru and Bolivia. The abduction of Sunborn children from this city by nomads, a term broadly used to describe the genetically engineered offspring of the Nephilim, was infamously carried out with the intention of disrupting a Solarian genetic program of regenerating the sun-born seed in the races of the earth. Sha'Maia was a fine seamstress and designer of sacred garments. Kantifa, a shipbuilder and initiate of the craft of KYI'RA, whose sunships were highly prized the world over. Sunships were aquatic vessels employing the use of advanced solar energy. There were few of them in use, as those who operated such a craft had to undergo special training and initiation into the solar mysteries. The last is Imlian, an astronomer and astrologer of Egypt. In addition to their particular skills, these men and women were trained and initiated by the Thoth for the greater path that lay ahead. Upon entering the cave of Mithara, Thoth led his company deep into the earth, taking another route than the one he had traversed in his serpent initiation. He was guided by a blue sphere of light before him that none other could see. Suddenly, from the dim flickering of their torches, something glinted before them. Raismes moved to the right and into a crevice in the cave. There, within a niche of the cavern wall, was a dark blue crystal, carved and polished into a sphere and positioned in a golden casing resembling 3 concentric circles. Each band was set with precious stones. When Thoth placed his hand above the sphere, which in the midst of the golden bands resembled a 3-ringed Saturn, a barely audible tone was emitted from the vibration of the golden rings. The band of initiates then heard a sound that was a loud crack. They looked to the right of the niche with the crystal sphere. They looked to the right of the niche that held the crystal sphere, and there before the smooth surface of the cavern wall, a bolt of electricity appeared suspended in air, coming from above and touching the floor of the terrestrial vault. The beholders tasted sulfur in their mouths, and the fine hairs of their arms bristled, and the air in the chamber became dense and charged. After a few moments, the electrical bolt began to dissipate into fine strands, streaming through the room, emitting a soft hissing sound. As this phenomenon occurred, the company noticed the wall of the cavern next to the crystal sphere becoming gradually transparent. It too appeared now as electrical energy, its particles rapidly contracting to reveal a smaller chamber on the other side of the disappearing barrier. It was then that the group of souls stood transfixed at what they saw. There, upon a white marble pedestal, reposed an artifact of gold and precious stones. All present knew without a doubt that they were gazing upon the sacred arm, the Ark of Grace. The box casing served as a foundation for the sculpted forms of 2 seraphim kneeling toward one another, their glorious wings pointing in unison with their extended arms, as if to embrace something unseen between them. There was a circlet of gold at this midpoint, yet what this circlet had once contained was missing. At the base of the Ark of Grace was fashioned a serpent of malachite and lapis lazuli coiled about a dark crystal which appeared black, yet in the light would reveal itself to be deep amber. 2 rods carved into golden ropes served as a means to carry the sacred arm. Wow, I haven't read this since I wrote it probably, and I'm feeling that really the sacred arm pretty much looks like this today, only because it would have gone through a process. and it would have changed energy fields several times. But I think the basic design is maintained. Now, excuse me, now it's almost like a resonating light field, but it moves back and forth from the resonation of that higher light field into more of a form that we can see. And so I believe that it still looks like this. In fact, I'd like to try to take this description and maybe make an artwork and possibly transfer that into Second Life as well, into the Osirian. My little mind is just working with all of this at the moment. I'm going to read this again. I'm going to read this paragraph again because I really didn't read it very well, as usual. So I'm going to read it once more. The box casing served as a foundation for the sculpted forms of two seraphim kneeling toward one another, their glorious wings pointing in unison with their extended arms, as if to embrace something unseen between them. There was a circlet of gold at this midpoint, yet what this circlet had once contained was missing. I think that's probably where the Manasari is now, the Manasara, or whatever it's called, Manasari, yes, the Manasari sphere, the Manosphere. This is my opinion at the moment, it may change. At the base of the Ark of Grace was fashioned a serpent of malachite and lapis lazuli coiled about a dark crystal which appeared black, yet in the light would reveal itself to be a deep amber. Two rods carved into golden ropes served as a means to carry the sacred ark, the sacred ark, which would have been attachable. You could take the rods off. All stood mesmerized by what they saw. Thoth Raismes came to each, and from a woven horsehair bag at his waist, he took metal wristbands that were composed of 3 separate strands, 2 of which were copper, with middle strands, the middle strand being an alchemical metal called orza. Upon the left and right wrists of every member of his company, he placed these bands until all present wore a band on each wrist. They noticed that Thoth himself did not wear these bracelets, but then his strong bronze wrists were always adorned with large golden bands, especially crafted for him. Raismes explained to the Raset Ankara, gathered closely about him, that these wristbands would allow them to touch the ark without ill effects. Raismes announced they would wait until nightfall before removing the ark from its repository. The members of the band each found a place to lie, to sleep for a few hours before the sun set. In the womb of the goddess they felt comforted, knowing that soon their way would be less sheltered. As quiet settled upon the guardians of the sacred arm, an eerie presence resided in the chamber with them. The torches configured their flaming dance about the golden box, causing the sculpted seraphim to appear to move gracefully as if in a splendorous dream. Sha'Maia could not sleep. No weight upon her eyelids was strong enough to close the windows of her soul to the entrancing image before her. She slid silently among the still breathing forms to move ever closer toward the bejeweled receptacle of power. 12 feet away from its shimmering presence, she stood rooted, unable to traverse any further. At this moment, she emitted a sigh and sank into a heap upon the ground, covering her face and trembling like a newborn fawn. She felt so unworthy, so small in the sight of God and his altars of glory. Strong hands suddenly were upon her. Their force consumed her body in a rush of light. She yielded to them gratefully, for the touch was empowered with the gentleness and simplicity of a beam of sunlight through the misting rain. They found their target just as surely and tenderly. They found their target just as surely and tenderly lifted the fawn to stand upon its wavering legs. As Sha'Maia turned her head upward, she saw through the mist a fiery halo of gold, framing eyes like none other, the cobalt blue of Thoth Raismes. He spoke to the little seamstress of KYI'RA, saying, "You are the child taken in the night for the destiny of this day. The measure the measure of your life has brought you here in this moment. Like the doves that alight upon heaven's gate, surely your flight is no less sanctified than is theirs. Life is a streaming. You live as one who composes the stream. Yet the stream is but a thread of greater weave, the garment of eternity. Who will sew this garment together? Those whose minds touch the slender threads as a mother would the sleeping heads of her children, each strand a filament of her heart. Take up your loom and needle and finest thread." Sha'Maia stood no longer wilted in Raismes' arms. She bloomed to her full height, feeling as if she had not spoken with words, but sent his message into her heart. I'm sorry, let me try that again. She bloomed to her full height, feeling as if he had not spoken with words, but sent his message into her heart on the wings of a falcon, gliding serenely upon currents of sun-drenched air. She knew then that she too was a bird of the sky, unfettered by the storms that gathered close to the earth. For a moment they soared together, the golden falcon and the snow-white dove. Sha'Maia had not taken her gaze from his while she had been shape-shifting into another realm. All at once the girl was aware of the chamber in which they stood, still touching one another. Raismes' skin was warm against hers. Reality claimed her, and she was conscious of being in the embrace of a man of flesh whose blazing eyes took her breath beyond the mountains and into the sun. She could feel her face redden, and he released her with no hint of her inner drama reflected in his eyes. The others were stirring now. Soon they would begin the ascent with the relic of Orion to the world above. I was given that to place in the book, not to tantalize, not to make it a sort of a little sensual moment. Of course it was, for her anyway. But the reason that I believe it was given to me was to accent the fact that this was a man in a human body, even though amazing he was, and that his auric field gave off such a powerful presence, but yet at the same time, there was a very, very human aspect to him. And any woman would be, somewhat susceptible to that, depending upon her inclination at the time. And that's a part of the story, it's a part of the life story. And I believe that's why that was shown to me. With his divine powers, the thrice great could have easily wrapped the ark and the whole of the Raset Ankara in a Merkaba of light and deposited them onto the Atlantean coast within the briefest passage of time. Yet he knew the way was ordained to be more arduous, for the sacred On had to be traced upon the lays of the land and the sea. Once they reached the inland sea of Kotugia, 250 miles from Mount Aduhara, they would board a sunship for the journey from Kotugia through the canal of Benjenka into the Hespar Ocean, now the Indian Ocean. From there, the sunship would take them into the Sea of Atla, Atlantic Ocean, and to Atlantis. Their passing was slow, for none but the Raset Ankara could touch the ark. They took turns carrying the ark along the ancient footpaths of the mountains in a steep descent to the Kabul Basin. There, at the opening to the basin, was the river Lasip, a long and winding serpent of water which stretched far across the Kabul basin to the land of Bul and Tor. Thoth guided his party to a narrow crossing of the river, where there was a barge attached by a sturdy line to both shores. When the band came into view of the opposite bank, they saw 4 men standing there, one of them positioned upon the barge. The narrowness of the crossing allowed Thoth to instantly recognize one face among them. Thoth also saw the man and knew him. Even from this distance, mused Raismes, his brother, Huskaholi looked like a squat toad, his olive green robes enhancing the frog-like image in Thoth's mind. The Thoth had not been surprised by this encounter, so Stefan could sense as he stepped up beside Thoth on a large boulder to the right of their brother. To the right of their brother, who was standing ibis still near the water's brink. Stefan's mind feather-touched Raismes's and flinched at the knowledge it contained. He knew then this was no chance meeting, but ordained long before he and his brothers had been conceived in their mother's womb. Thoth Raismes peered into the soul of Huskaholi and saw there a viper's nest, the serpent's mouth open wide and perilously close to its prey. Yet he knew this tawdry traitor could not of himself possess such odious power. Its source was elsewhere, nearby, but cloaked in a gray mist. The malign fog led to the tall one, standing upon the barge. He was apart from the rest in form and figure. Lean as a stalk of raven's wheat in winter, he was clothed in a pearl gray robe. His hair was dark, crowning a large forehead and crudely intelligent brow. Pallid was his face. Such whiteness of skin concealed a blackness of soul, as if the languid pale of his countenance betrayed that his body had been sucked dry by a demanding pit of fire residing deep within his unremitting will. Although from this distance Raismes's physical sight could not behold it, he saw with inner vision the penetrating onyx eyes of this man. Not onyx, onyx. Onyx eyes. For a moment, these eyes were locked in time to his. I will have it, they shouted into his soul. I will have it before this earth fades. Thoth then turned his attention to the 2 other men. One was a little taller than Huskaholi, yet younger and more comely. Pale brown locks curled around his face. He might have been a Specian poet. Now, the parentheses here is Greek poet, but I don't think the Greeks, as we knew them as Greeks, were alive that long ago, but perhaps this is denoting the fact that their ancestors are part of this. I don't know. His gray-blue eyes burned inwardly in a contemplative manner, yet in his demeanor, Raismes sensed something trapped, struggled between light and dark. This is the Specian, or sort of Greek poet. Then well, he actually isn't a poet. I'm sorry. The terminology here is simply that he resembled a Greek poet in his demeanor. Then there was the youngest amid the 4. He resembled the gray-robed one in stature. His hair also was dark, yet his eyes were a restless green that seemed to argue with the sunlight, changing in hue according to the temperament and disposition of the host. Thoth, with his breadth of sensitivity, knew he had met this youth before. In his mind flashed the moment of their encounter. He saw himself with his 2 brothers walking across the footbridge to the house of Huskaholi, Thoth uncomfortable beside the pregnant servant girl who pressed ever closer to his side. This young tiger was the son of that girl, and also, more importantly, he was the son of Huskaholi. There was more to this boy's lineage, but it lay just beyond the reach of Thoth Raismes. It prickled his senses. yet he could not seize upon it. Now remember, when we're dealing with time like this, the young woman pregnant could have a son 50 years old. You know, it's kind of mind-blowing, but that's how it worked. Although he wouldn't look 50, he'd probably look 20 or maybe younger. Raismes returned his attention to the gray robe. This was the viper in the nest. With this man, Thoth knew, he was fated to contend. He turned to his brothers and said in the soft voice of lightning, "We break our journey here for the day." Thoth and Stefan felt thunderclouds building upon the shoulders of distant mountains, rumbling ever closer to their beloved master and brother. So, although it may not be clear here when it says Raismes returned his attention to the gray robe, this was the viper in the nest. He's speaking of the the gray robe one, which isn't named here, but of course it's Babette. On into the twilight, both parties camped upon opposite banks of the river, neither hailing one another nor making any sign of acknowledgement of the other's presence. Raismes waited. He sat near a small fire, his eyes closed, apparently in an altered state of consciousness. Lhasa, his sister, was full of concern for her eldest brother. She could not get Thoth or Stefan to speak of it, but she knew, as they did, that some great threshold was about to be crossed, and all around her she felt the solitude of one who knows the time is near. In restive flight, Lhasa paced the bank of the river, seeing the firelight of the distant camp resemble a glowing cat's eye in the vaporous evening. The young woman shuddered slightly, and drew her dark blue cloak about her. Her violet eyes narrowed as she stared into the haze. Something or someone watched her. Her heart was seized like a hare suddenly devoured by a great cat. "I will not turn away," she resolved. "I will meet the darkness beyond the veil." There was a dancing light in the sea of mist, and just above the surface of the water there stood, or seemed to stand, a young man with black hair and brilliant green eyes. Those eyes commanded her. He wore only a breechcloth, and she felt stirred by the beauty of his body, and then in the next moment repulsed by such a feeling. He seemed to reach out to her, not with his arms, but with his mind. His presence was alluring, as if a lustrous fruit were being proffered to her, the sweetness of which concealed a poison within. With great effort, Lhasa moved backward a few paces. She tripped on the slick rocks and fell to the ground. She was in a forest, a dim, gray forest, where the trees moaned her name in their creaks and groans. She seemed to run through the undergrowth as it clawed at her body, yet she could feel no earth beneath her feet. "To run is futile," the voice in the trees rasped. Yet run she did. Abruptly she came into a clearing. There were large standing stones in a circle, and in their midst was the gold gleaming form of the sacred An. It wavered in the breath, a sudden stillness inside her. "Death transformed through beauty," the voice said. She took a few cautious steps toward the ark. Then just outside the stone circle to her left appeared the young man with the green eyes. His mind spoke to hers as his mouth formed an almost feminine smile at its corners. "Go to the holy casket," he beguiled, "for it is your place of safety and comfort. The forest cannot hurt you so long as you are in its embrace. Reach out to it, touch its golden warmth, bask in its amber flame. It is your source. All Lasse's being wished to do so. She ached throughout her limbs and into the very core of her heart to touch the shimmering wings of the seraphim, to caress the dark stone held by the serpent, to feel the carved symbols beneath her sensitive fingertips. Yet she was kept from moving forward by another pair of eyes, like two sapphires set as stars within the lofty heights. They were the eyes of Thoth Raismes. He shone into her soul, freeing her heart from the spell of the green-eyed one. She knew then that for her to interact with the ark in this altered state, while in the presence of this seductive youth, would allow a breach to be formed that could be entered by evil hearts and minds. It took only the psychic touch of a priestess and female kin of Thoth to create the path that darkness needed to suck at the breast of light, untendered and never quenched. That knowledge stirred the serpent of her destruction from its nest. Suddenly the young man was no more. In his place a black stallion stood. By size and beauty of him, it surely must be an Atlantean Abakim. The notation here, the Atlanteans genetically manipulated many animals and plant species. They created an animal of magnificent and extreme psychic sensitivity from the genetics of the small, ungainly ancestor of the present-day horse. The Atlantean breed resembled some of the finest equines we have today, probably finer. The prized bloodline of equine kings. Yet when this creature turned to face her, she saw the viper at its heart. Its eyes widened madly, the whites flooded with streaks of red. The stallion's teeth bared and saliva foamed upon its muzzle. Wrath was in its features, paralyzing the young woman with fear. She struggled to regain her centered stillness. She called upon her beloved brother. She prayed to the divine sun god. She wept at the feet of the sun god's mother. All it seemed to no avail. The beast came closer to her in a ghostly trance of death. She smelled his sweat-soaked hide and felt the dankness of it in her marrow. Lasse, as an initiated priestess and sister of the great Thoth, was not deceived that this experience was of the flesh. She knew well, even in this her darkest hour, that what was being unraveled before her was no more than a mental trap for her mind, a snare for her senses and emotions. She knew also that such illusions contained the power of their creators, and that this power, should it succeed in subverting her will, could kill her just as surely as a swift arrow to the breast. She did not fear death, but she did bemoan her failure to vanquish evil, even as its foul breath was upon her, choking the air from her lungs. In her last moment of sanity, she clasped her mind upon a memory in her childhood, when Raismes, then KYI'RA, told her a story about a young woman who fell asleep in a field of midnight stars, the flowers she so loved. With her remembrance, she lifted their scent of sweetness upon her breath. The woman in the story awoke to find these darkling flowers had turned to sadhis, or fairies, and formed a protective ring pass knot about the maiden, preventing her from being devoured by Kumba, a large Arctic wolf. Desperate, Lasse pictured the flowers, the eternally beautiful midnight stars, swirling on their stems and transforming into magical and powerful sadhis, surrounding her in a shining halo of light. This effort brought to her the eyes of Thoth once again, and from out of their depths his whole form appeared between her and the slavering stallion. In that instant, the horse became a dark cloud emitting a whistle sound, high-pitched and terse. It grew smaller and smaller in size until it disappeared completely. Her brother turned to look at her, and his peace was upon her once again. Lasse sighed and opened her eyes to find herself near the river with Raismes kneeling beside her. A cool breeze swept her up in a cradle of slumbering comfort. Later, when she awoke, Thoth gently helped her to stand. He took her to a place not far from where they stood, near the water's edge, where a single midnight star blossomed lazily in the moon patches of night. It could not grow here, so far from the heights, Lhasa exclaimed. Thoth smiled his Tirna smile to her and said softly, the goddess's children arise wherever she kisses the earth. They come and go in a dream that is eternal, while we wrestle with a single day. Morning dawned as a slender blush upon the horizon, fluttering dove-soft in the crevasses of the mountains. Its gentleness belied the drama of the coming day. Lhasa sat by the river to gaze once more upon the midnight star. Her mind flooded with scenes of the night before, and she knew they were not yet free from the struggle with the beast. Raismes and his brothers talked softly in the distance, while Irutus, Kantifa, and Baradaka busied themselves. I'm sorry. Exercise. I can never remember to turn her off. I'm reminding you. Exercise. I'm going to start that paragraph again. Raismes and his brothers talked softly in the distance, while Irutus, Kantifa, and Bardoka busied themselves with loading supplies upon the 3 sturdy llamas, who even so nibbled hungrily upon tender buds. She could see Elmulen climbing down from the eastern slope, where he had spent the night studying the stars. Sha'Maia had been very quiet during the journey from the cave of Mithara, and now she was curled in her sleeping robes, dreamily watching the 3 brothers. Removed from the immediate campsite and sheltered in a small grove of trees was the Ark of Grace. It sat covered with a thick kopa, a blanket made of llama hair coated with a waxen substance from the dija tree, which made it somewhat waterproof. How could she have been so near seduction as to betray the sacred on, she grieved. Little Pearl, a steady voice summoned her attention. Lhasa stared almost guiltily into the face of Raismes. He was kneeling on his haunches, as he often did when communing heart to heart with his younger sister. Wow, it's very difficult for me to read some of these passages. I'm going to do the best I can here. His hair, only slightly lighter in hue than Lhasa's, was long and about his shoulders, with the ever-present band upon his forehead covering the sacred mark. He wore a simply woven brown shirt, a sleeveless copra jacket, and leggings tucked into doeskin boots. Certainly she had seen her brother regally dressed in the past, but he did not need outer trappings of greatness. His own wealth of spirit shone through the humblest of costumes. Why do you weep? He asked. I do not weep, Lhasa defended, her voice attempting mirth. Raismes chided her gently. Ah, so you do. Ah, so you do, for you wear your tears in your smile. You know my feelings, brother, she whispered. Thoth Raismes looked at his sister for a long moment, as one would watch a small bird high in a windswept tree. He then said with full acceptance of her, in the tone of his voice, I do. They are not worthy of a priestess, and yet they are heartfelt in their longing to be set free. In this world, little Pearl, all life is set between 2 pillars, the one that is of purpose and the other which is of loss. Surely as you stand between them, you may draw upon the strength of both, for neither is your enemy. Lhasa moved a little nearer her brother, comforted in the glow of his knowledge, although at the moment bewildered by his words. How can one draw upon loss and not become it? She queried him. Her lord and brother lifted her chin as he replied, all is but a fleeting moment, thus loss is no more than gain in the instant. Why create a puddle in the rainforest? All is washed clean as if bared to the sky. Your failings are not yours alone. They are droplets in a cloudburst. Let them fall unhindered by your need to claim them, and so new life will spring from the floor of the forest, greater understanding, clearer purpose. Lhasa wasn't quite sure she understood all of this, but it felt good to her soul. Shansi, they come. Kantifa's voice broke the sacred moment between Raismes and his sister like a dry twig. All looked to the river crossing to see the barge slowly being pulled to their side of the bank. All 4 men were aboard. Lhasa could see the gray-eyed one's strong young arms tugging rhythmically upon the rope of the barge. She pressed her hands upon the earth, her nails sinking into the flesh of the mother. Too soon the morning was fading for her, and a harsh light seemed to be cast from the sun onto the land. Sha'Maia peered between the towering figures of Kantifa and Thoth at the strange men. They frightened her, and she wished the Raset Ankara and the sacred On were far from this place. Lhasa placed a sheltering arm about her, and Sha'Maia relaxed somewhat. Little did the seamstress know, thought Lhasa, of her own biting fear and shame. As they stepped from the barge and stood before Thoth Raismes, the tall one in the gray robe, now wet and muddied to the knees, seemed less dominating, more like a drooping stork with his long legs searching for grace beneath the water-soaked garment. It would have been comical had the man's eyes not been so disturbingly acute and alive with intent. The green-eyed youth gracefully stepped to the robed one's side. He announced to Raismes and the Raset Ankara in his sing-song voice that was husky yet revealingly young, "You stand before the great Thoth, Babet el Hafaren." No reply was forthcoming from Thoth Raismes or his company. Instead, a lively wind blew suddenly down from the heights, and its whining call, sifting through the peaks above, seemed to mock the words spoken by the proud youth. When he saw that his declaration had not struck its mark, the young man's eyes flashed like 2 green-tipped spears. Then Babet spoke in a low rumble, which seemed to come from the center of his chest rather than his lips. "So you are the one all of Nimjab is calling the Thoth." It surprised Lhasa that such a gaunt creature could sound like an awakening bear just shaking off the slumber of a winter's passing. Yet there was something fading in the sound, as if the deep fatigue he carried was never sated with sleep. The one called Babet continued, "I introduce to you my companions, one of whom you already know." He first gestured to Hoskaholi, who bowed shortly, his nostrils pinched in the beginnings of a grimace. "And this," Babet thoughtfully added, "is his son, Gemeki." I didn't say that right. Jemi. Ghemi. How in the world would you pronounce that? Jimmy. I'm going to say it, Jimmy. So the green-eyed one has a name, thought Lhasa, and it is not just a phantom of my fiendish dreams. Babet motioned for the 4th man to come forward, who had been standing back from the rest. "This is Irios, a gentle soul, yet a man whose words are swords of fire. He is a writer of books, and one day so he will write my works for the benefit of all mankind." Eros gave a startled, sad look at Babet, and then furtively glanced to Raismes before he cast his eyes upon the ground. Babette cleared his throat and pitched the rustiness in his voice an octave higher, attempting to sound pleasing, so he asked, "May we know the identity of your companions?" Thoth Raismes, in a not unfriendly, yet uninviting manner, let me read that again. Thoth Raismes, in a not unfriendly, yet uninviting manner, stated simply, "You know them." Babette was somewhat taken aback for a moment, but quickly recovered and decided to come to the point. "We are here to relieve you of your precious cargo, for which God has ordained to be in the care of the true Thoth. It is I, Babette el-Hafaren, who claim that honor." Babette's eyes heated up as if tendered by the breath of a dragon, and his pallid skin seemed to gleam like a bloodless moon. Raismes' sight took on a soft fire, banking in waves of compassion, as he looked into the soul of this man whose audacity would have staggered the Solar Legion. After a moment, Thoth Raismes reached out and touched Babette's shoulder. The angry man flinched as if having been branded by a scarlet letter. Addressing Babette by his birth name, Thoth then said, "I have no desire for this confrontation, Ayokata. Yet you will not set history upon a different coursing this day." Babette backed away from the golden man before him in a movement of defiance. Wordlessly, he strode back to the barge, followed by his companions, who stuck to him like waspish shadows. Let me try that again. Waspish shadows. Several hours passed. Thoth Raismes went alone into the grove of the ark, and there he sat cross-legged near the sacred Ob, present in spirit, yet removed from his body. The sound of Thoth playing his flute, and several maka birds whistling in the low branches were all that carried upon the air. On the other side of the river, Babette stood concealed among the boulders in a circle of gemstones. He held a large sapphire in his left hand, while his right arm was raised above him, brandishing a serpentine staff toward the heavens. For all its pomp, this was not an empty performance. Babette was a skilled wizard of the craft. He slowly drew in the air with the staff symbols of divining power. Then from a pouch about his neck he took out a golden ring and placed it upon his finger. As he did so, Thoth Raismes felt a shaft of fire move down his spine like a cutting blade of ice. It was then that Raismes knew Babette was in possession of a sacred artifact taken from the murdered body of his father. Upon the finger of the magician now rested the ring made by the shaman Filia for Thoth Muzurud. As Babette stirred the cauldron of his full powers and unleashed them upon the Thoth, a white falcon brought by the wind and circled low. Let me read that again. As Babette stirred the cauldron of his full powers and unleashed them upon the Thoth, a white falcon was brought by the wind and circled low above them. Babette felt his strength drain, and he called out in an ancient tongue. As he did, a single arrow sliced through the air and grazed the breast of one of the feathered one. It lurched forward and flew in a scattered pattern, disappearing through the trees. Raismes felt a jagged pain in his chest. He moved inside the pain, inviting its sting, cleansing its vile poison with his own salving soul. "Come with me, Babette," he spoke into the deep cavern of the magician's mind. And Babette twisted violently as he struggled to keep his soul in his body. To no avail, he felt it slide out of its earthly wrapping and gliding into a silver tapestry of light. A form took shape out of vapor, and a beautiful white stallion stood before him with a glistening horn upon its forehead. The eyes of the creature shot into his being. Take heed, Babette, it spoke inside his mind, for all you do now is forever sealed. It shall become your tomb. Despite the gravity of the words, Babette knew great love from this creature. It seemed to vibrate in the whiteness of its flank and in the tapered spiral of its shining horn. A translucent sound of bells wafted the air and delicately enfolded Babette in a cocoon of soothing melody. He sensed his armor melting away, and the greater part of him rejoiced, for he felt alive and bright, as if the sun had risen for him at last. Yet the gremlin within shrieked in pain and grabbed upon the throat of the man, saying, "You shall not abandon me now. You shall not." Babette took hold of the reins of his greater self and pulled it from the trance of light back down the dark tunnel and into the void. He found himself prostrate upon the ground with Jimmy standing over him, his bow slung upon a tanned and muscled shoulder. Babette was spent. In his mind's eye, he could not shake the vision of the glistening unicorn, its blue eyes a fount of blessings pouring upon a blackened heart, nor could he shut away the ascending sound, the crystal of bells tracing holy notes upon his wanton soul. He could not accept that he had seen and heard. He could not accept what he had seen and heard, neither could he deny it. It shakily tore the Thoth He shakily tore the Thoth ring from his finger and glared upon its intricate patterning of diamond stars. It shall become your tomb, the voice had spoken. And there's a note here. Thoth informed me that the entire battle with Babette took 7 hours. However, he did not wish for this book to dwell on such scenes and therefore requested that I enter only the most important moments into the record here. Well, obviously, I wasn't going to talk for 7 hours or write for 7 hours. As the eventide washed the sky with azure rain, so Thoth Raismes and his company ferried the sacred On across the river Lasset. None were there to see him pass, but a herd of Aziza deer grazing upon the long grasses of its fertile banks. Well, I'm kind of wondering if he got the ring back. I mean, or did I read that? I don't think so. It said that he tore the ring from his finger and glared upon its intricate patterning of diamond stars. But it didn't say if Thoth got it back, so I don't know. Anyway, that, my dears, is the end of that chapter. Boy, whew. And so we go to the next chapter, as in life.